There's my email. Can you hear me better, Esme? Are you on?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you a lot clearer.
When I go back to the table, can you hear enough, or do
Yes,
I have to figure out?
we can hear you. I just had to mute a few people.
Okay, no, that's okay.
Because we're getting feedback. That's what.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, here's the couple We'll start with some pictures of just different kind of containers that would work for a potted plant, and they're not all sold as pots. You know, I get them at different places, and we'll talk about each one here in the slides. But my email, if anybody wanted to write it down, and again, this is being recorded, so you can go back to it if you miss it. But anytime you want to ask me questions over email, I'm always good with that, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So there's my email, and let's see the first slide here. I love that I made this pot. So it was I got it at Ross, and it was not in the pottery section. It was in the like statuary. They got little household like decor, and it had a head on it, right? It had like a crown thing on the very top, and I cut the crown off to make it like hold soil. I always do this when I'm in Ross or wherever. I knock on everything and see what kind of material it is, because it's very hard to cut or drill in porcelain. Like you can, but it's very hard to do. So I found that this was plastic, knocking on it, you know, and you can tell it's made out of plastic. And I also could tell it was hollow. So I took it home, cut the top off, drilled some holes in the bottom, filled it up with soil, and it's been one of my favorite pots ever since. That aloe now is even bigger. It's a little tiny aloe, not aloe vera, but a little tiny variety that stays real small, and it just keeps dividing and getting bigger. And every time it blooms, the blooms get more and more and more. And because it's an aloe plant, the small volume of soil doesn't matter. It dries out quickly, but that's okay for an aloe. I wouldn't have put something that needed more water in it because it's quite a small thing. It's probably the, you know, size of two fists put on top of each other or something. It's hard to tell in the picture. But that's just one thing that you could do. So plastic is very easy to work with. And as long as it's got a hole in the bottom, it works as a pot. You have to have a hole in the bottom, in my opinion. There's certain plants that you could grow in soppy soil that would not drain, but you're not going to want to have this stinky, gross soil sitting around. So no hole in the bottom means the soil is going to get stagnant. It's going to decompose without oxygen because it won't drain, and it'll be like sewer mud, swamp water, basically. Get that sulfur smell, ammonia smell, and the roots, most plants' roots would die in soil like that. Some can handle it, but it's not something you want. So you want holes in the bottom. When it's dry, you water it very, very thoroughly and let lots of water come out the bottom hole. That washes out all the salt that might build up in that soil. And then you start over again, and those roots grow in moist soil with air in it. That's what you need. So that's the rules on anything would work as a pot if you follow those rules. The material it's made out of is a big difference too. So some plants, some pots, for example, the water would evaporate out the sides, like old-fashioned terracotta with no glaze, right? So terracotta pots with no glaze, the water, they dry out very fast. That's what difference. So the material the pot's made out of depends on how fast they dry out. Terracotta with no glaze dries out real fast. Glazed pots or plastic pots, they dry out a lot slower because the water's not evaporating out through the sides. So just keep that in mind. And if you want a plant to dry out like a cactus, you would use something, it's okay to use something that's very porous like that evaporates out the sides. And if you want something, if you have a plant that you want to keep moist all the time, like a pepper or tomato plant or a strawberry, you would have a pot that does not evaporate water out the sides that way, because you'd want it to stay wet as long as possible. So the type of material it's made out of, it matters, but as long as you fit that to the type of plant you put in it, anything goes. I want to talk a little bit about heat stress with different types of pots before I go through the rest of the slides. So some pots, people worry about, like a glazed clay pot. You can't touch it in the summer if it's in full sun. It's so hot. On the west side, it'll be afternoon on the west side. It gets so hot you can't touch it. But the soil inside the pot insulates the heat. So I've tested it with a thermometer, a probe, and right up against the inside of the pot on the west side, it can be 130, 140 degrees, which kills the root tips, the ones that touch the pot on that side. But you go in just 3 inches or so, and the soil is perfect. It's fine enough where the roots don't die. So, but working in the nursery, we check roots all the time, see if something's ready for sale. So we turn it upside down, slide the pot off, check the roots underneath. And what I always find is the roots are dead on the west side of a black plastic pot, especially in the nursery. So I know that it happens, especially in the summer. You're going to lose the root that's touching the plastic on the west side. But the heat doesn't penetrate into the fluffy soil that's very insulative very far. So the roots at the core would stay okay. But one thing people don't realize is if you were to move those pots around in the middle of summer, it's, half the roots die on the west side of the pot in the summer, and that's probably inevitable. The problem is if you were to move everything around on the porch and one of those plants got spun, and now the east side that was the only live root that it had dies also because it got spun to the west. It's something people don't realize they're doing. And I just want to warn everybody, if you have a heat sensitive plant, like something that just doesn't love heat, I would not move them around in the summertime. Just let them deal with where they're at. I wouldn't worry too much about the type of material the pot's made out of, because I don't think it's a big difference whether it's like glazed clay, even metal, wood, whatever. It all seems to be about the same as far as heat tolerance, but you don't want to spin them or move them around in the middle of summer. Wait until fall and then moving them all around. So that's all I'll say about that. But it's something that most people don't think about. I just have seen it happen from turning over so many pots in the summer. And here, let's go through a couple other types of things that would work for pots and some stuff that I've had around. This thing is definitely about only the size of your fist, a little tiny, tiny pot. I bought it on Amazon and thought it was going to come about a foot tall. And this little dinky little tiny thing came. And I thought the only thing that's going to survive in that little tiny bit of soil is some kind of cactus, because you can't keep it wet. It dries out in a second. So I put this little itty bitty cactus in there, and it has lasted for years and years and years. I don't water it much. It doesn't grow very much, but it never dies, and it never shrivels or browns or yellows, and it's beautiful. It just stays kind of, And so little tiny pot like that, hard to keep wet, but it works great for a little tiny cactus or a little tiny drought tolerant plant, aloe, anything like that. So that's a little tiny one. It has a hole in the bottom, remember, and I bought it with a hole in the bottom already, and it was made to be a pot. I just didn't realize how tiny it was going to be, but it's plastic. It's another one. This I actually bought. So at an antique store, they got antique beer cans, and with a can opener, I cut the whole top off the beer can, poke some holes in the bottom, and metal is the easiest thing to make holes in the bottom. Any metal drill bit works, or you can even I do it with my pruner sometimes, like poke a hole in there and twist it a little bit and make 3 or 4 holes in the bottom. And this lasted maybe 3 or 4 years before it rusted away, but it was a nice little, fun thing. And people got a lot of attention. People ask about it. Oh, is that a real beer can or whatever? So something like that works too. It has holes in the bottom. It's the right size for the kind of plant, that drought tolerant house plant there. Snake plant would work great indoors too. It's a house plant that's in it, a snake plant, and it works great for indoors. Good conversation piece. This is just a regular pot, but they're expensive. I gotta admit that I probably paid $30-$40 for that thing. It's only about a foot by a foot, but I've had that really rare exotic sago palm in there for about 15 years, and it has not, like faded or crumbled or anything. So you kind of get what you pay for in pottery. And if you really want an accent in something like this, you can, if you know something's slow growing, it won't outgrow the pot anytime soon, and you really just want to have something that's like an attribute to the porch or patio or whatever, then you could put some money into nice glazed pottery too, made for it. Make sure there's a hole in the bottom, remember, because I've seen many pots look just like that, and there's no hole in them, and I either have to drill a hole in them or just don't get them for that purpose. The ones without a hole in the bottom, what you can do if they're indoors in your house, what some people do is buy a really pretty pot, and then they slide another pot into it. So if the pot that slides into it that the plant's growing in can be taken out, maybe put in the bathtub or on the porch and watered really thoroughly and really let it drain, and then slid back into a really nice like glazed pot or whatever you want that looks pretty but doesn't have any holes in the bottom. That could work. And I've seen it work really well, especially when people are maybe afraid that the drips would get on the tile or whatever. It's a good way to avoid that problem and still have the plant grow well. That's another way to avoid that. This was actually an old swimming pool filter, a brass swimming pool filter with different holes sticking out of all the sides. And I put some kind of cactus or succulent in each hole. And man, it's just like really easy to take care of. I water it maybe once a week. And it's blooming there. The cactus is growing out of one of the holes is blooming. All of those plants have bloomed over the years. And it's just, I like the look of industrial, something that wasn't made to be a pot. Something that's not natural at all. It's a total man-made thing, but I've turned it. I feel like nature took it back over or something. I don't know. That's a philosophical reason, I guess, but I like that theme of like old industrial things that are turned back into a natural setting. So that's another thing you can do. As long as it's got a hole in the bottom, you can do whatever kind of container you want. And that's another Ross deal. Another one from Ross, cut the top off, drilled holes in the bottom, plastic, same thing. This one is one of my favorites. So it's a glazed pot. The pot's not as big of a deal, but the place of this cactus is the pot fit perfectly in the crotch of that tree. And I just love that over the years, the vines of that cactus or whatever have almost like hugged onto the tree, and there it is sitting there up in its perch for good. So that's just another more of a position that cactus loves a little bit of shade from that Palo Verde tree and doesn't need much water. So very rarely I go out there and fill up the pot a couple times and really well water it and then leave it again for 2 weeks maybe. These are old rusty soup cans. I mean, they weren't rusty when I started. I started with like real soup cans. Easy. The top's already cut off. You poke holes in the bottom with anything, and they work great as a pot. They do rust away within a year or two. They start falling apart in maybe 2 years, but it's a good. I mean, if you like the rustic look, if you like the look of them, you can. I've also seen the painted, really good collections of like soup cans or those 1 pound coffee cans or whatever, and people paint them with like whatever colors they want, pastels or bright colors or whatever. And I've seen those screwed onto a wall, so they're all on a pattern in a wall or just along a stair rail or something, whatever. But I've seen soup cans painted to bright colors, and then they last longer too that way, and they work really good as containers. Easy to do. The can opener cuts the top off and poke holes in the bottom with whatever you want. Ice pick if you had to. How about this is my favorite. It's not my ex-wife's favorite, but it's mine. I just love recycling, reusing, so it was, I was going to throw it away and I thought, hey, there's a hole in the bottom of that. Turned it into a nice pot. So that's all I'll talk about those. Let's see what's next on my list here. Now I'm going to do the demonstrations of potting a few things and talk about potting soil. So I'm going to switch this off of the screen share, and we'll come back to it in a minute here when we talk about the types of plants that are good for pots. So get back. Oh, my legs. All right. So so I'll talk a little louder so you can hear me now. What I want to talk about is potting soil, and at the same time we'll do a couple demonstrations of planting because I'm going to mix some soil to do it, and it just goes together that way. So potting soil, what I'll say about potting soil, and I'll do it up here so because I don't need to be back there yet. So what I'll say about potting soil is that it's made for pots specifically. If it says potting soil in the bag, that's what it's for. It's supposed to be in a pot. And there's so many bags of stuff in the nursery. There's compost, there's mulch, there's topsoil, there's every kind of thing in a bag. It has to say potting soil if you're going to put it in a pot. That's It's different. It's different than all those other things. And it's different because it drains and it has to drain fast. Like 2 minutes is about the most you'd want water to stand on top when you fill it up before it drains all the way out where there's no standing water. And that doesn't happen with any of those other products really. It has to be potting soil. So potting, now that we're there, potting soil is what you're looking for. It varies a lot in quality. And the reasons it varies in quality is because of the ingredients that they put in that bag. So the bulk ingredients is, and when you get your handout, there is some like do-it-yourself. If you ever wanted to mix your own potting soil, there's like some recipes with different ingredients you could put in. But you'll see when you look at that, that most potting soil is about 60 to 80% some kind of organic matter. And that's like the most expensive would be like peat moss or coconut coir, they call it. It's like ground up coconut husk. And the cheapest would be like pine bark. It's the cheapest thing you can use for that organic matter that makes up almost the whole thing. 60 to 80% is that organic matter. The other 20 to 40% then is something that helps it drain even better, which would be some kind of inorganic material, which is like coarse sand is the cheapest about. The other two would be perlite or pumice. And those things, they're big chunks of things that let the water drain through faster to kind of make it potting soil. So it makes it potting soil and not like mulch. So those are the ingredients, but they vary. So the cheapest kind of potting soils obviously is the cheapest kind of organic matter, pine bark, with the cheapest kind of material to make it drain, which would be sand or perlite. And so that's what the potting soil is about. And like I say, there's a kind of some do-it-yourself percentages of what you could use, but just so you know, the difference is the ingredients and what they're made, what type of ingredients are in that bag. So you get what you pay for in potting soil. The most expensive bags I usually use are maybe $20 for a 2 cubic foot bag. And the cheapest are usually $12 or $13 for the same size bag. But what you get for that extra is a potting mix that will not need as much fertilizer. That's the problem with using the cheapest ingredients, that pine bark and perlite, for example. It needs a lot of fertilizer, and some of them come with fertilizer in them. And you got to also know what kind of fertilizer that is, if it's slow release or very quick release, because pine bark and perlite is going to need a whole lot of fertilizer. And if it's quick release, like works fast, you're only going to get a couple of weeks out of it before you got to start adding fertilizer. And if there's no fertilizer included in it with the pine bark and perlite, you're going to, from the very first day, if you don't add fertilizer when you water, it's going to start sucking the energy back out of the plants that you put into it, and they won't grow very well. So there's a big difference in the ingredients. If you buy expensive potting soil, then you get high quality ingredients that don't need a lot of fertilizer. Peat moss does not decompose. That's what needs fertilizer. Pine bark starts to decompose the second you get it wet, and then it needs fertilizer to decompose. I won't get into all the science of it, but basically if something's going to start to break down, it's going to need fertilizer to do it, and it'll steal that fertilizer from the plant in order to break down the mix. So materials, the expensive ones like peat moss or coconut coir, they don't need fertilizer because they're not going to break down. They stay like they are. They're resistant to decomposition for a long time. That's what makes a better potting soil, those ingredients. And as far as the other ones go, the ones that make it drain, the sand, the perlite, and the pumice, really I could use any of them. They're all about the same quality. What I do like is pumice. Perlite and pumice look like little white rocks, both of them. Perlite, they call it that because it's super lightweight. So if you have a big pot that you want to move around, would be where I would use perlite. It doesn't weigh that much. But if you have a little pot that you want to give some weight to so it doesn't tip over, that would be something that you would use pumice in because it's heavier. So basically they're the same thing. Pumice costs a little more. I also like pumice because when you water, it doesn't float to the top and go over the edge like perlite does. So I'm going to show more right now, but that's the basics of potting soil. You get what you pay for. The $20 bags usually come with some kind of slow release natural fertilizer, because we'll talk about fertilizer later, but natural fertilizers, they last longer in the pot than chemical fertilizers do, and they don't build up salt like chemical fertilizers do, which salt is a problem for plants. So the more expensive ones, they usually have that slow release natural fertilizer in them. And nowadays too, a lot of them have bacterial inoculants. So there's a lot of good bacteria and good fungus that are good for plants that are found in the ground and in a really good garden bed, for example. And they culture those bacteria and fungus, and they put them in the potting soil so you get those to help the plant grow better. So there you all kinds of good stuff in good brands. And I'll when I get up here, I'll show you a couple good brands, my favorite couple of potting soil. This one, you can't read that. Let me get it back up. It's Happy. So a couple good brands. One is Happy Frog, if you wanted to write it down. Happy Frog potting soil. And another one is called Ocean Forest by Fox Farms. I got a bag somewhere around here, but those two are kind of my favorites. I'm going to use the Happy Frog potting soil right now for the demonstration. And the list of ingredients is long. They have good quality ingredients that aren't going to need a lot of fertilizer added to it every time you water for things to grow well. But here's where I'll maybe save you a little money. I do not think you need all different kinds of mixes: cactus mix, palm mix, African violet mix, whatever. You know, they sell all kinds of potting soil too for special types of plants. Rose mix, I've seen even. But I don't think it's necessary. I'm going to show you how. There's only two kinds of potting soil in my opinion, and it's how they drain. It's like light mix, I would call something for cactus that the water goes right through super fast. Like it's hard to back up, you know, into standing water when you water it. And then there's regular. There's regular and light, you know. So like cactus mix and regular basically would be the two. And the two demonstrations I'm going to do, one is some plants that would love regular potting soil right out of the bag. And then the other one, we'll mix some cactus mix and plant some more drought tolerant succulent type things in a pot with that. And really, I think that's all you need. So really, what if you were going to put your money into some potting soil and buy it, I would buy one of the better brands like the Happy Frog or the Fox Farms, something that's, you know, a little more expensive with a lot of good ingredients, a lot of good natural slow release fertilizers. And I would have that around all the time. If you want to make cactus mix, I'll show you how to do it. And then all you're going to need to buy is perlite or pumice. And in my opinion, pumice is a better product. It's heavier and it doesn't float out the top for when I use it. And that's for cactus mix. So I'm going to mix them both right now. We'll start with some plants that need kind of a heavier mix, a regular potting soil right out of the bag. And that's like, you know, the vegetables and the flowers and the things that are going to dry out pretty quick. You know, they use a lot of water. They need to stay moist all the time. And those would need the potting soil just like it comes out of the bag. So let's get started with that. I got an empty pot, right? And the first question about pots a lot of people ask is, do you need to put like gravel or something in the bottom? And my answer is no. The only reason I ever put anything in the bottom is if the particular pot has such a giant hole in the bottom that the potting soil comes out like an hourglass out the bottom. Then I would put a piece of old pottery that I got broken laying around that's not flat. You don't want it to seal the bottom hole, but you want something chunky to kind of break it up where it's not such a big hole, clog it halfway. That's the only thing I ever do. When you build up a bunch of gravel in the bottom of a pot, all it does is bring that level. The bottom of any pot is always going to be soppy, the very bottom inch where that water just doesn't quite drain all the way out. And when you put a bunch of gravel in the bottom of a pot, it just raises the level of that soppy soil higher and higher and higher, is kind of what experiments have shown, that it's not the best idea if you just want a lot of root space for the plant. When I do add things to the bottom is if some people have these giant planters, right? And they put little tiny flowers in the top of it. something that needs, 6 inches of soil or a foot of soil, and this pot is 3 feet tall, then you can fill the bottom with gravel, or I've seen people use old plastic water bottles squished up and thrown in the bottom. Something that never breaks. You don't want anything that breaks down or rots away. You want something that never breaks down, kill the space basically in the bottom. And then you put weed cloth on top of that, or something, again, that doesn't break down, but that doesn't let the soil go into whatever you got below it, the gravel, the bottles, whatever. Weed cloth, and then a foot of soil that you need. And that top foot of soil you can maintain and put new potting soil in when it gets low, and mix in fertilizer if you want, all that. But you're working with the top foot of this giant pot. It's the only time I put gravel in the bottom of a pot is to basically kill space down there. In this case, this pot's not very big for the amount of flowers I'm gonna put in it. I want all the root space that I possibly can, not gravel in the bottom. So I'm just gonna pour the potting soil directly in there. Another thing about the hole in the bottom is that if the soil is moist, it won't go out a hole as easy as the bottom. And I like to work with moist potting soil. If you've had a bag of potting soil in the garage for a year and you pull it out and it's powder, bone dry, put a bunch of water in it, poke a couple holes in the bottom so the majority of it drains out, maybe roll it up, seal it good, and leave it for a day to like hydrate again, and then work with it like that. It's good to work with moist soil. So I'm gonna put some in the bottom, but I'm not gonna fill it up all the way. And what I'll do is measure a little bit. I'm gonna put these 2 types of plants in there. One's a 4-inch geranium that I'm gonna put in the middle, and the other ones are little tiny 6-pack plants, pansies that'll go around the edge. I'm not real big on design, but I do know the basics of, if you want a pot to look good only from one side, you put the tallest stuff in the back and the shortest stuff in the front. And if you want a pot to look good from all the way around, you put the tallest stuff in the middle and the little stuff around the outside. So this one's going to look good from all angles, inside my porch and from the outside of my porch. And so the thing in the middle, the tall thing in the middle, is this geranium. And so just one of them in the middle. And because it's bigger than the rest, I'm going to kind of put it in there and see if I have enough soil in the bottom of this pot for it to line up with the height that it's supposed to be. And that height in the very end, I want the soil level to be just shy of the rim of the pot, right? The rim of the pot, you don't want soil to be level with the rim, and that's after you pack it down. It's going to go down a lot. When you pack it with your hands, it's going to go down a lot. And you gently pack it in as you plant stuff. So I pack in what's in the bottom of this and then measure it and see if this is going to line up with just a little under the rim. And the reason you go under the rim a little bit, 1/2 inch or so, when everything settles and gets watered, you want it to be about a 1/2 inch shy of the top of the rim. If it's level with if it's absolutely packed full to the top of the pot, or especially never make it kind of humped, because what happens when you try to water it, the water goes off the edges and doesn't soak in. You want it to build up, a little 1/2 inch of water, build up and drain through, and build up and drain through. That's how you water it in the end, is eat anything for that matter, even cactus. You want a little bit of space there for that water to build up and soak in, build up and soak in, not like a hump on top. So I'm going to put a little more soil that's short. I do it with my hands at this point. Remember, pack it down. I've seen people pack potting soil so tight it doesn't drain anymore. You're not trying to use like a tool or anything for this. Your hands are about as much pressure as you need, just to tamp it down so it's not going to settle a lot when you put water on it. Now that's perfect. I put, it's to the level of the bottom of this thing. I can, and these kind of plants, you want to be careful not to break a lot of root. And I carefully take them out of the pot. The only time I break any root is if it's just solid white and only on these kind of plants that are like 6-packs or 4-inch vegetables or flowers. If it's just solid white root where you can't even see the soil anymore, I might rip just the bottom layer of roots off before I plant it. I'm not a big fan of breaking root at any time though. Anytime you can leave the existing root, the plant's going to not shock when it goes into it. You put it in the pot and it's going to grow the same tomorrow as it did yesterday. Any root that you rip off, it has to replace. And that's why I only do it on these type of plants. These type of plants can replace the root in a couple days usually that you rip off. So you just don't want to really rip off any root you don't have to, because every little bit you do, they're going to have to replace. It's just a little setback. So this one was fine. I can see lots of soil. There's not too much root on that. I didn't even touch the root. Put it in there in the middle. And then these though, these little 6-pack plants I'm going to put around it, they're much shorter. So if you look at on the side of the pot, I got the soil level down to here for the other one. I'm going to have to build it up now. Build it up a little more for these to sit on the level of the bottom and be level with the top of the thing. So I'm going to add a little soil all the way around this one. Pack that down pretty good. And now it's up to the level that when I set these in there, sitting on the level of the soil that I have in the pot, they're right at the edge. I don't know if you see it. So these little 6-pack ones now, they sit right in there. I got the soil level right up to the bottom of where they go, and they'll be level with where I want this final soil level to be too. And I'm gonna put, you can pack, we'll talk about these being annuals, like flowers being one of the easiest way to fix up a yard real quick. You buy some as much, nicest pots you can afford. And you get some, these are super cheap, $3 a 6-pack or so. And you can just pack the plants in there. This is something you could do, your yard's looking kind of bare, you got a party tonight. You could go in the morning, get these things planted up, water them in, and it just like totally transforms the yard. And when they start to look bad, you rip all this stuff out and put new stuff in, cheap plants, expensive pot, good soil, and cheap plants, and you can always keep them looking good. People ask me all the time, what do you have that blooms all year round? There's nothing that looks good all year round except for changing out the plants for the winter and summer. So I put a lot of them in. I'm gonna put all 6 around here. And remember, they're all gonna need a lot of water because they're plants that need more water. They're not drought tolerant. So yeah.
What size of pot is a diameter of the yellow pot?
About a foot in diameter and about a foot tall.
Okay.
And it's glazed ceramic, so it'll hold water for longer, because all this stuff, especially I'm packing it so tight, I'm gonna have trouble keeping it wet in May, like at the end of the season in May or so. It'll be hard. It would be hard to keep wet if it was any smaller or porous on the material too. If it, so I use like as big of a pot as I can, and a pot that doesn't evaporate water out the sides, and that would be the best for these type of plants that are going to need a lot of water.
Okay, sounds good.
And then, so after I got them all in there, you fill the cracks. You fill the cracks with soil. This is where the fingers really come in handy. You're just poking in all that soil around into all the cracks. You don't want any air gaps around there. You pack it all in. And remember, you're trying to get the level just shy of the rim of the pot, not all the way up to the top, just a ½ inch under or so. And that's after you pack it down with your hands. And then this type of plant, right away you water it in. You water it, I would water this 4, 5, 6 times on the porch with the hose. And that gets it washes out. Sometimes potting soil is a little strong in the fertilizers or salts or whatever, washes that out. Make sure there's no dry pockets in there, whatever it is, but you really, really, really water this right away when you're done, especially if you've ripped any roots or anything. Wash all the soil off the leaves and all that, and then let it drain. And then you put it wherever you want, or let it start to grow. But like I say, this kind of thing would look absolutely beautiful the minute you're done planting it up, for those quickie, yard rehabs or whatever. So that's annual flowers. This could be the same with certain vegetables, and we'll talk about which ones, but this could be like I would probably use a little bigger pot, but the same concepts would work with like a chili pepper plant in the middle and maybe some like herbs around the side or something like that. So same soil, same, pot that doesn't evaporate water out the sides, same time of year, even everything. So vegetables can work the same way as these annual flowers do. All right. So that was the kind of plant that needs a little more water. And now we're going to do some succulent type stuff, right? This pot is like, it does evaporate water out the sides. It's not terracotta, but it's like not glazed, it's rough surface clay. It's got a hole in the bottom like they all should. And the soil that I put in this pot, though, if I put soil straight out of the bag, I would risk the danger of overwatering all these cactus and succulents. And a lot of them, that is the way you kill them, is too much water. And remember, too much water is never in one setting. I've had people afraid to put more than a tablespoon of water on there because they think you can overwater a cactus all in one time. But you could water this 100 times in a row with all the cactus in it, and then let it dry out really, really bone dry before you do it again, and that would be perfect. You can't overwater in one setting. It's good to leach a lot of water through when you water even cactus and succulents, but what you gotta do with cactus and succulents is let that soil go bone dry before you do it again. And that's why I'm gonna mix a potting mix right now that drains super fast and dries out fast, especially for people who tend to water a little too much on cactus and succulents, and that kind of keeps you from being able to keep it too wet. And remember, too much water is never dries out over a long period of time. That's too much water. It's not too much gallons of water all at once right now. So I'm gonna mix the potting soil first. And the way you do it is you use the same amounts of regular potting soil like we did. Good quality potting soil. Cactus like nutrients too. And so what I do is get the same little pile. This is not, you don't have to weigh it. You don't have to measure it. You make one little pile of potting soil right out of the bag. You make another little pile of, remember that stuff that makes potting soil drain better. There's a little bit of perlite in regular potting soil, a little bit. But what I'm gonna do is double that amount of, and I like pumice, remember, I'm gonna use that. It's heavier, it doesn't float out all over when you're doing it. So, like I say, there's no real accurate measurements other than two little piles that look about the same size. So there's two piles, one pile of the white stuff, one pile of the potting soil right out of the bag, good quality potting soil. And to make cactus mix, you just mix them together. So trowel works good. It's kind of fun, get a little messy. Get it all mixed up, and it's just by eye again that you mix it together. When it starts looking like a consistent product and there's no patches that are whiter or patches that are blacker, you know, when it looks like it's really well mixed, it's done. It's plenty done. So you mix all that together, and there you got cactus mix. So again, like, it's not worth buying cactus mix in a bag that's specially made for cactus. That's what it is. It's regular good potting soil that you always have around, mixed with half and half with something that makes it drain a lot better, like perlite or peat moss or sand. I've also used coarse sand. If you use sand as the half and half, you have to get like clay sand, it's called, or concrete sand. It has to be sand with no dirt in it whatsoever, because that's what you're trying to do, is get drainage. And sand, some sand, the cheapest kinds of sand, they come with a lot of dirt mixed in, and it'll clog that potting soil up so much that it will never drain. So you can use coarse sand. But like I say, here's my cactus mix. Remember the same concept. I'm going to plant 4 different things in this pot. And remember, you can pack them in too, because it's okay. The more plants that are in a pot, the faster it's going to dry out. So in this case, terrific, right? It's going to dry out faster, which is what I want for cactus. But so as far as building up the soil level from the bottom, I build it up to the level of the biggest pot. It's about a 6-inch pot. This thing's hard to see, but I wish you could check it out. It's cooler. It's a lady slipper that's a dwarf lady slipper that's variegated, if any of you guys are into succulents. I've been waiting to put it in a good pot for a while now, because it's kind of one of my most recent prizes. But this pot, what I'm going to do is make it one-sided, right? This big old thing, it's kind of flat the way it is too. It's like flat this way and wide this way. So what I'm going to do is put it in the back of this pot right here. And then I'm going to put the big thing in the back, the big tall thing in the back, and then work my way to 2 shorter things. And then the very front is going to hang over. So this will be a one-sided pot. When you look at it, it'll be from one side, it looks really good. From the other side, all you'll see is this big thing. So that's the way you do the one-sided pot. So this big old thing, it goes in the back. What I got to do is put enough soil in the bottom, again, for this to set right on it and be the right level. So put that aside. Just kind of winging here with how much soil.
Jonathan, while you're filling that pot, do you think that like a 7-inch container would be enough for annuals, or does it need to be much deeper?
I wouldn't, I'd say that 1 by 1 foot pot is about well, if you had a tiny little pot, you could probably manage to put one little 6-pack cell in it. But like I say, the more plants, the more root, and the more root, the more water it sucks up. So for annuals or vegetables, I try to use the biggest pot that you can manage to move around or manage to handle or manage to whatever, or afford. I use bigger, if I'm just doing it for pure production, like if I really want to grow peppers in pots, I'll use 15-gallon pot, like black, ugly 15-gallon pots. But the more soil volume that you can get, the better that kind of stuff is going to grow. Like a window box thing is fine. It's got more volume of root. It doesn't have to be real deep, but it has to be like the more plants have, just need to have more soil that holds water for longer.
Okay.
Or you just have to water a lot. Like I say, a little 6-inch pot, you could have a wonderful 1 petunia in there or something, but you'd probably find yourself watering it every day. If you put a saucer under it, maybe it's every 2-3 days, but it's just a matter of management. I mean, it would work, but it would cause you to have to water more often the smaller the pot is.
Okay.
That would be the trick. All right, so this thing lines up now with the level that I want it to be. Give me a little space on top. Cockeye it to the back a little bit so you can more see what I'm doing in the front of it. All right, so that's my big thing in the back. Get it straight. You can move it any which way you want. I want to bring this up because just I saw them here. If you have thorny cactus that you're trying to put in these, none of these are, but barbecue tongs, that's the trick. You can grab the thorny part with the tongs, take the pot off, put them in there. I use these all the time for like thorny arrangements. So there's my tall thing in the back. And then I have these are dwarf aloes. Remember, like aloe vera would overtake this pot in like a month, but these are dwarf little aloe plants. They're both blooming right now. And one's kind of a reddish color. I know it's really hard to see. And one's almost a white color. And so I like to put different shapes, sizes, colors all mixed in together. If this one is like a leafy thing in the back, these have that aloe pattern, like a flower, I guess you'd call it. The shape of the plant is this. And then the plant I put in the front is a completely different shape. This cactus will hang over the edge there. It's a droopy one that's known for growing over the edge of the pot. So over the front here, I'll put that right up in the front and it'll grow over like this and bloom off the front. And then these 2 aloes right behind the tall thing. And the sizes of them will be like that. I got a tall thing in the back, 2 kind of medium-sized things in the side by side that are the same shape and different color, and then the thing in the front that can have a totally different shaped plant and the pattern of growth being droopy instead of perky. So it's a little bit of everything, all in one pot. Oh, I remember these are shorter pots now. I got to add some soil or else they're going to be too low in there. So now that I am ready to put the 4-inch pots in there, put the little bit of soil that'll build these up now, take them off. Another thing I'll mention is I said to not, it's good. Any root you break off of a leafy plant, like a vegetable or a perennial especially, don't ever break roots off of things like a jasmine or something that's a perennial bush. Any root you remove is going to take a long time to replace. Cactus and succulents, they're very, very forgiving. If you I've taken a lot of them, I've bought them in a 1-gallon pot, and I want to put them in a half that size pot. You can shave root off, you can squish them and rip them and whatever. It still sets them back a little bit if they lose a lot of root, but it wouldn't be the reason you lose them if you're gonna. Because the life of a succulent is above ground. The roots are very temporary. They grow, they die, they grow, they die. It's the life of the succulent is all above ground in the succulent leaves or tissue above ground. So they're much more forgiving. If you have to break some root, I mean, I wouldn't do it on purpose, but if you had to break some root or it accidentally fell apart or whatever, you're better off with a succulent than you would be with a perennial especially. So all these are the same size pot, so I didn't have to add any more soil when I added all 3 of them. All right. And this isn't hanging over the front yet, this little cactus, but it will be. And I'll give you a better shot when I'm done here. And then the same thing, but this is a little touchier. You got to get the soil right in the little cracks. Sometimes this works with a trowel, you know, out of the trowel, you can like, you can't move them around a ton, but it's a little tedious work. I won't even finish it right now because it'll take more of our time, but you fill in all the cracks. The other end of the trowel, the butt end of the trowel, you can poke in the holes to poke it down, or a stick or whatever you got, you know, you poke the soil into the cracks more and more so it's tight. And then the difference in cactus and succulents, especially if I've broken some root, is I use moist soil to do it, but I don't water them right away. Cactus are so succulent, or I mean, cactus and succulents are so susceptible to root rot that if I've broken some root, those are open wounds, and which you inevitably do planting something like this. And you want them to callus over a little bit before you get like wet water, like water and dirt that would carry pathogens like fungus spores and all that onto the freshly open wounds on the roots. So what I do is I use moist potting soil, not wet. I pack it all in around the best I can, and then I give it a day, and tomorrow I'll come back and water it really, really good. Water over and over and over and over again, water it really good. If it settles too much or the soil finds its way into a dry pocket that I missed, I'll add a little bit of soil and top it off and leave that maybe ½ inch of space that the water can build up up to the rim, and then it's good. But that's the only difference between the plants that need a lot of water and the succulents is I will wait a day to water the succulents. They're not going to wilt or dry out in a day like the other plants would. If I didn't water the other ones right away, they'd be wilty and maybe half dead by tomorrow. Where in the case of these, they're just fine. You could leave them drying out on the table with no pot for a couple of days and it wouldn't hurt them. So that is, again, I wish you could see it better, but that's the cactus or succulent one. So, nope, still no. All right. So let's get moving on to the rest of the things I want to go over, and then we'll get some questions, hopefully. So the last things I got to talk about is watering and fertilizer. And I want to talk about those plants that grow better in a pot. So I think what I'll talk about first is we'll end with the plants that do best in pots. And right now I'll talk about watering to get it out of the way while I'm still got the camera like this. The watering, you know, if you've ever taken or listened to one of my irrigation classes, it's all about deep soaking. You got to get the water 2-3 feet deep underground for the trees and shrubs. Obviously, in a pot, the whole rule flip-flops. You can't. There's no way to deep soak a pot. You only have the amount of root that's there. So it's more of you keep it, what you want in a pot is the roots to be, you need air. Roots need two things, water and air. And so it's nice if they can have both at the same time. So like a well-drained potting soil lets air in there. Right when the water drains out the bottom, air comes back into the soil. And then the moisture, the particles of the potting soil holds that moisture as long as it takes for the roots to absorb it and grow well. So watering in a container is lots and lots of water, let it drain out the bottom, and then not again until the surface dries out a little bit. For potted plants indoors, like house plants, a lot of people have problems with the little gnats, like they're called fungus gnats. Those gnats live in soil that never dries out. So if you wait until your plants have just an inch of dry soil on top, you know they'll still be moist at the bottom if you're checking periodically and make sure that they're, right when you catch them with a little bit of dry on the top, inch or so down. That will break the cycle of those fungus gnats and you won't get those as bad. Is one good reason. Other than that, you just avoid any kind of root rots or anything. If they dry out a tiny bit between waterings, that's for a plant that needs more water. A plant that needs to dry out really good, like the cactus succulents, obviously you do the same thing when you water, but you wait longer before you water them again. That's how the watering goes on the two of them. But either way, no matter what you do, when you do water a potted plant, lots of water through it, whether it's a cactus or a regular plant, lots of water through it. House plants, you put them in the tub, I usually do, or on the porch, and just lots of water, 4, 5, 6 times, and fill it up, let it drain, fill it up, let it drain. You get rid of salts that are a bad problem with potted plants. If you ever see the little white crunchies on the rim of an old terracotta pot or white crunchies on the surface of the soil, that's salt. It's the salt that hurts plants. It's toxic to plants. So you can wash that away and wash it out the bottom of the pot just by lots of flushing water through. If the plants are on your porch, I mean, obviously you're doing it with the hose, but don't be afraid to put too much water on them all at once. Lots of water, and then let them dry out a little bit before you water them again. A little bit on the stuff that needs more water, like flowers and vegetables, and a lot of drying out for the succulents. So that's one deal with water. Has to flow out the bottom, has to have a hole in the bottom. One thing I like to do, so if I used to have a porch all full of flowery stuff that needed a lot more water. I've since converted them to drought-tolerant aloes and cactus, which I love, by the way. I used to water twice a day in the summer. Now I water once a week, same things. But anyway, back to the plants that needed more water, what I would find was that something that's really old and root-bound would need water like every single day, maybe twice a day. And then something newer, something smaller, something in a bigger pot would go 2 or 3 days without water. So how, if I wanted to put if I wanted to go out there on a regular schedule, I could go out there every 3 days if I put saucers under the plants that dried out every day. So, right, a saucer is, this is a rough example. Maybe you'd want to find one that's a little prettier, but the function is the same, a pretty deep saucer. What you do is you put that underneath your plant that is getting dry too often, right? So if this was my plant that dries out in 1 day, everything else lasted 3 days. If I put this under it, now that all lasts 3 days, because the water that's built up in the saucer can be absorbed by this one that dries out really fast over the next couple days, and it just kind of evens out everything. If you have an automatic system for the watering, like I'm going to talk about in a minute, that really helps to put saucers under the stuff because if it's on a frequency, you're not going to have the ability to water one separate than the other one. So one way you can make the plants that dry out faster last longer is by putting saucers under them. Some people I've heard worry about salt buildup with saucers because the water that's absorbed up from the water that stays in the saucer gets sucked up into the potting soil and evaporates away out the top. And you can have salt buildup in there, but remember, whenever we water, we're watering enough that water goes through the bottom, overflows the saucer, and that eliminates the salt problem. As long as you're watering long enough that the water overflows the saucer every time, then you're washing out salts every time that you water, and the salt buildup is not a problem with saucers at all. So that is that's the one way to balance it out. And here a little example of an automated system is this real same drip irrigation stuff that you would get at the irrigation store, right? Same thing that's underground in your front yard, probably for your drip system, 1/2-inch poly tubing. What I do is I put it onto the faucet. So this is a timer. It's a battery timer. This screws onto your faucet instead of your hose. And I put a Y on there because I do like to have a garden hose to supplement the things that need more water. I mean, you got to have a garden hose. So you put your faucet, goes into a Y. One side is your garden hose, one side is this. And this is a battery-powered timer. Every brand, there's different brands. They have a couple of AA batteries usually that last a good year. And you can set this for how many minutes you want it to run for. And for pots, it's usually going to be only 3 or 5 minutes before it really flows out the bottom of the pot. And you can set it for how often you want it to do. And in the summer, it's going to be every day for plants like flowery stuff. And it might only be once a week for succulents, something like that. And what I would do if you have a mix of things is leave the succulents off, water those with the hose once a week, and everything that needs water every day or every other day, put it on this system. And then so from that timer that you set for how many minutes you want it to run for, and what time of day you want it to start, you can you go out and you run this around. I've seen people run it across the top of the porch on the rafters, whatever we call them, for hanging baskets. You could do that too. If you have a lot of hanging baskets, you can run it up a pole and across the top, or you can run it up along the edge of the cement on the porch, or whatever situation you have. You can bury it if you want, but usually I leave it kind of just tucked into a crack. And then wherever you have a pot, which we'll do, This one's going to need some more water. So what you do when you have a pot is you, from the 1/2-inch poly tubing on the ground, you poke a hole like you would for a drip emitter on your drip system out in the yard. And what I use for pots is, I don't know if you can see it's a stake with a adjustable emitter on top. So this is an adjustable drip emitter, just like for your yard. I like the ones with the stake because what I do is poke it right in the middle of the pot, down in there, hide the tubing a little bit. And when you adjust the top, the adjustable portion, it makes a little sprinkler, right? I don't know if you've used them in your yard, but it makes a little kind of sprinkler, goes in all directions in a perfect circle. And you can adjust it where if it's a big pot, you turn it up all the way and it waters very well. If it's a tiny little pot, you can turn it down to where it's almost just dripping out. And the same kind of emitter can work for all the pots, big and small, on your porch, but with the adjustable top. And the stick thing that you poke it in with is perfect. So that's the only kind of emitter I use for pots. The rest is all the same material you use for a drip system. And I won't go into as much of that because you could follow all the same rules if you take a drip irrigation class, something like that. But you can definitely adapt it to your porch plants or your potted plants, wherever you're at. And so the other option as far as a timer, this is my favorite one just because it's usually, I don't have to mess with my drip irrigation system or anything. The way to go beyond this, a little more expensive, but maybe you like the idea better, is to have somebody or do it yourself add a valve, an electric valve, just like the ones that water your lawn and your drip system in the yard. You could have somebody add a valve, or if you have a valve that used to be for lawn that you're not using for lawn anymore because you eliminated it, you could use that valve for all your potted plants. And then you go to your timer, same timer as you use for the drip system, and you can set that for whatever you want. And remember, it's going to be very short run times of maybe 5 minutes, and it's going to be very frequently compared to your drip system. So you do have to have your own valve for these. You can't water them on the same schedule as you do your rest of your drip system. And if you want to go downscale from that, it's not really cheap. These little egg timers, you find at the hardware stores now, same thing. You hook this up to the hose bib and you hook that system I just showed you out the other end and wrap it around the porch or whatever and put the emitters. This one is it doesn't have a battery or anything, and all it lets you do is you turn it on for up to 2 hours. And it's hard to turn it such a small amount for only 5 minutes, but you try. And what it does is you do have to turn it on every day or whenever you're watering, but it'll turn itself off. Saves you a little time. These are only about $15, whereas the next one up is maybe $30 for the battery powered timer. So anyway, different ideas for automation. You can use pretty much all the materials that you use for drip systems, for automating. If you end up getting more and more and more pots, and they're not, especially if they're not succulents, you're going to need to water. So, I mean, eventually it gets to the point where most people don't have enough time to go out there and water with the hose all day. And so that's watering. Fertilizer, I won't get too much into it other than you should use it. I do use fertilizer on potted plants. Remember, in the ground, roots can go out searching for nutrients further and further and further and further. In a pot, they're locked in there. So I like to explain it like I've been to greenhouses where they grow tomatoes, hydroponic tomatoes, and there's 50 feet of tomato vine all growing out of a little brick like this big. It's because that little bit of root that it has never dries out. It always has air, it always has water, and it always has fertilizer. So, I mean, that's the extreme of what you're trying to do with potted plants. As long as you put enough water that they need, and as long as you put enough fertilizer that they need, and as long as the roots are getting air, it doesn't matter how big the root space is, as long as you're continuing that stuff on. So fertilizer is one of those things that runs out in a pot. The smaller the pot, the faster it runs out. There's different kinds of fertilizers. What I'll recommend is that you water-soluble fertilizers are easier, like a Miracle-Gro type, but everybody makes a generic one now. They're blue powders that you mix in water. They always come with a little tablespoon that's the measurement. It's 1 tablespoon to a gallon of water. You mix it up and you pour it on. Those ones are the easiest. They work fast. If you have problems like plants that are yellow or not growing very well, within 2 weeks after using it, boom, they start growing like crazy. They also run out in about 2 weeks. So it's quick to work, quick to run out. It's the cycle of that kind of fertilizer, water-soluble fertilizer. Natural fertilizers last a little bit longer. But most of them are solids like powders that you have to mix into the soil. So sometimes it's an option, sometimes it's not. There's also granular fertilizer. It looks like little BBs. It's granular fertilizer, slow release fertilizer, and you can get it for all different kinds of plants, roses or trees and shrubs, whatever you can. Just try to read the instructions as best you can. The problem is a lot of fertilizers don't have instructions for pots. So if you're worried about it at all and don't have a lot of experience kind of experimenting, just buy a fertilizer made for pots and follow the directions exactly. But I would use it. You'll find that there's a benefit to using it. Plants in pots, especially the older they get and the older the soil gets, the more fertilizer they'll need to have added. Very careful though, because fertilizer can kill plants as easy as it can make them grow better. It's just a little bit more than what makes them grow really good ends up killing them. So the natural fertilizers are harder to kill plants with. The chemical fertilizers are much, much easier and quicker to kill plants with if you overdo it. So don't overdo the frequency. Like don't use full strength fertilizer every single time you water. There's usually a rate, like if you do use it every time you water, you dilute it a lot down to a very weak solution for those water soluble ones. And if you only use it once a month, you use the full strength. So just try to read the instructions all the way and buy a fertilizer that's made for pots. If you want a little, I have experimented a lot with fertilizer. If you use granular kind of tree and shrub food, you could buy it everywhere. Don't tell anybody I told you this. But if you use tree and shrub food, you can use a tablespoon is a good amount for a pot about this size, 1 foot tall by 1 foot wide. A 5-gallon pot, say. A 5-gallon pot, 1 tablespoon is a good amount of that for there. And it's time release, so you can do that about once a month, maybe once every 2 months, and it works pretty good. So again, if you want to, if the pot's twice that size, you'd use 2 tablespoons. And if the pot's half that size, you'd use a half a tablespoon. So remember, it's very accurate. If you kill your plants, don't blame it on me. But I do know that that's what I use usually is granular fertilizer, just slow release, like tree and shrub food for if it's these kind of plants. And I'll put a tablespoon on for about a 5-gallon size pot, and then proportionally for bigger or smaller pots. So either that or just buy something for pots. That's it on fertilizer. Like I say, use it. Pests, I won't talk much about pests. It's a little bit in your packet. We talked about how to eliminate the fungus gnats, and the other stuff that you get in the house is like aphids or on the porch, is aphids. It's all really tiny bugs, aphids, mealybugs, spider mites, and most of them, if you take your hand behind the plant, kind of blast them off with the hose outside, obviously, you can eliminate those things. If they come back, you do it again. Insecticidal soap is about the harshest chemical I'll ever have to use on anything like that. But usually just a firm blast of water gets rid of all those little pests. So I realize I'm a little over time again, and that was it. And I'll show you a few slides real quick. Just examples of these plants that I just really love putting in a pot, and a quick reason why. So tomatoes, right? It's a big pot. That pot is like probably 2 feet by 2 feet or bigger, but it's got a big old tomato in it. Made lots of tomatoes. I had to keep it moist. I only let the soil dry out maybe an inch deep before I watered again every time. And it worked great. Regular potting soil, good potting soil, good quality potting soil. So this would be tomatoes or peppers. And the main thing I love about it is those kind of plants can be at least give you 2 seasons or 3 seasons for a pepper or tomato. And but there's bad times in the middle there. So it gets too hot in the summer for them. You can move them in the shade. Or if it freezes, if it's really like a frost warning on the news, you could put them under the porch if they're in a pot like this. Strawberries are, the only thing you got to know about strawberries is the time here is opposite of where you're probably used to if you're from somewhere else. We start strawberries right now. You probably should have maybe even a month ago when the weather first starts to get cooler. You put them in and they grow wonderfully all through the winter and all through the spring and maybe even into a little bit into June. You get tons of strawberries. I love to grow them in a pot because they love potting soil more than they love our native soil. Our native soil will have a lot of problems with nutrition. They'll turn yellow. In a potting soil, they grow wonderfully. And see all them berries hanging over the edge of the pot? That's in a 5-gallon pot, a big one. And so all those berries, the worst thing that can happen to a strawberry is it lands in the dirt, bugs and rot. So if they're hanging over the edge in the air like that, wonderful berries without the straw or any kind of ground cover. It's just a really good way to grow strawberries. Herbs, and not all herbs, right? It's perennial herbs. The herbs that go to seed really easy, like cilantro and basil, put them in the ground in a real good garden bed, because what makes them go to seed is a little bit of drying out or a little bit of running out of fertilizer, and they don't do as well in a pot. What does really good in a pot is rosemary, sage, tarragon, all the ones that are like a permanent little bush. Those ones love being in a pot, and they love drying out a little bit between waterings because it makes the aroma and the oils on them even stronger when you do it that way. So perennial herbs, not annual herbs, but perennial herbs love being in pots, work wonderfully. Jasmine, this is a jasmine, Arabian jasmine, but there's a lot of plants in this category. Rhododendrons, azaleas. They're plants that love acidic soil, and they do better in potting soil than they do in the ground. This same jasmine, I've seen them in the ground every time they turn yellow. Yellow leaves with green veins from lack of iron and high pH and whatever. You put them in a pot with good potting soil, wonderful. So gardenias, right? Gardenias, jasmine, those are some plants that really do good in our climate. They just don't do good in our soil. So that's another thing that might grow better in a pot. Palms love being in a pot. I would put a saucer under a palm. The people who grow palms professionally know that the bottom of the roots would want to be wet all the time. The top of the soil can't be wet all the time. So a saucer works really good. I make sure there's a tiny bit of water in that saucer all the time, and that thing just grows like crazy. And so that's the way you manage palms in a pot. When you buy a palm in a nursery, usually the holes in the bottom of the pot are not in the bottom. They're about 3 inches up the side. So it creates the same situation. The bottom of the roots are always sitting in water, and the top of the soil always stays pretty dry. But palms love being in a pot. Their roots can be very, very compressed, and they deal with drought. Even if the roots do dry out in the bottom, it doesn't seem to hurt them at all. They just don't grow quite as fast. So palms, another one. This is an indoor palm, the kind that has to be indoors like a house plant, but palms outside work great in pots too, unless it's a palm that gets so big so fast, like a Mexican fan palm or a Canary Island palm, that it would just outgrow a pot in no time and start to blow over all the time. Those ones probably aren't the best, but dwarf palms or houseplant palms love being in a pot. And I already talked about the annuals. It's that situation of like, you want something that's always looks good, buy a really good pot, really good potting soil, and change out the plants anytime they don't look good.
That was great. That was a lot of information.
Long again, for sure I'd be short on.
That was great. It was great. You always do a good job. A couple questions. How do you feel about the cloth type pots? Any problems, concerns, and then?
Yeah. I have, one thing they say is they're not supposed to root out the bottom end of the ground, but I found that they do. So, which is okay for some stuff, but if you, like a tree will root through the bottom end of the ground, and then they become very, very, very hard to move. So you lose the mobility part of it. And if you're going to lose that, you might as well have planted them in the ground, So that's one issue I've had with cloth containers. And the other one is talk about, what do you call it? Permeable pot, like water evaporates out of the side of every which way on those.
Yeah.
So they dry out faster, which sometimes is good. Maybe it's good for the kind of plant you got in there, but I've had trouble managing the water in them because they dry out they evaporate from every which way. And I've had trouble with them rooting through the bottom, which you could solve with maybe a piece of plastic under them so the roots couldn't go through it.
Yeah.
And then just keeping them wetter.
Yeah, I was thinking about trying them, and I just, that was my concern, that maybe they would just dry out too fast.
Yeah.
Well, if that happens, then I can put them inside a pot, maybe.
Yeah. Or just water more often. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Or have something in there that likes to dry out too.
Right.
That's the only issues I've had with those. And around here, our nursery industry is so big in Phoenix, you can always find used plastic pots. I think the cloth pots are, honestly, they're more common in places that don't have a big nursery industry because plastic pots are hard to find.
Right.
But here, any nursery will sell you used black plastic pots for like pennies. And if I could get a nice big 15-gallon pot to put something in plastic, it's cheaper and it holds water longer and they don't root in through the bottom as
Right.
bad.
I kept all the ones I got from the trees.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, you can usually find them on the curb, usually on bulk
Right.
trash pickup.
Yeah. How about seaweed extract? Is it good for vegetables in containers, or have you used that?
Yeah, definitely. Follow the directions. You don't expect it to give nutrition as much as like fertilizer. So it's not really a fertilizer. Like I would still use some kind of fertilizer with nitrogen in it. But seaweed has a ton of micronutrients and hormones and good things for plants. Don't overdo it, follow the directions like you're supposed to, but it adds, like when you're just using a nitrogen fertilizer to make stuff grow,
Right.
it has everything else